Public Works Committee is hereby called to order, and the only item on the consent agenda is approval of the Public Works Committee summary of minutes. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. That's approved. Item G1, please.
Item G1, resolution approving changes in the state highway secondary road system within the existing corporate limits of the city of Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
Thank you very much. Mr. Turner.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the city has a number of roads that are maintained as city streets. There also are a number of roads under North Carolina statute that are owned and maintained by the North Carolina Department of Transportation. North Carolina, different than a lot of other states, has no county roads or no roads other than city, state, and private. Occasionally there is a need to transfer a road's maintenance from the state system to the city system. We haven't had one of those in a number of years. We regularly look at it, however, every year and make determinations as to whether there are any roads that should be moved. This year we've identified Meadowlark Drive, which council members and the public may remember is a project that is proposed for improvement under the bond package. Moving it from the state system to the city system would make it possible to construct it using our process, which will be speedier and therefore get the public a project much more expeditiously than if it was on the state system. Also, a basic philosophy is that roads that are completely within the city limits and do not connect up to roads leaving that do not physically leave the city themselves are appropriate to be city roads. Therefore, staff recommends the transfer of this road from the state system to the city system.
Questions from Mr. Turner? Comments? Mr. Clark? All right. Do you have a motion?
Second.
All right. Discussion? Not. Those in favor of approving the recommendation, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. That is approved. Thank you. Item 2.
Item G2, report on planned pedestrian enhancement project.
And this is the handout that you have. By way of introduction, I ask that this be placed on the agenda for discussion this evening. We're all aware that there was recently a tragedy in which a young child was killed on a street without a sidewalk. And this is not the first time in our city's recent history that has happened. Just a few years ago, there was another child killed in a different part of the city. There have been any number of pedestrian vehicle accidents involving adults. Most often, but not always, in areas that don't have sidewalk or don't have a crossing in which someone was walking along the side or trying to get across the street without any kind of official facility assistance. I think it's a good idea for us to take a look and review for the public's consideration what we are trying to do to retrofit as much of the city as possible, particularly where there are identified problem locations with pedestrian safety facilities, whether sidewalks or crossings. And I ask staff to prepare for us an update on what we are doing and what we have planned in the near future in that area for our information, for the public's information, for our discussion. Ms. McCullough, will you be going over what we have here and what we're doing?
Yes, sir.
Please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. As Councilmember Bessie spoke about, we were asked to provide information on pedestrian mobility and safety projects. In front of you in the memo, we talk about some of our programs. The first would be the Safe Routes to School program. Safe Routes to School program particularly focuses on child pedestrian safety as they travel to school. The program encourages more active modes of transportation, and that we work with schools throughout the city to identify infrastructure needs such as pedestrian signals, crosswalks, curb ramps, sidewalk extensions, some safety signs, or anything that might help the children traveling from schools and home to school or school to home to travel more safely. With the bond funds, there were $2 million were identified for child pedestrian safety projects. We've listed the 8 projects that we've identified at 8 different schools. There's 1 project in each ward, and we've also listed the schedule for those projects. Some of the schedules may seem to be extended out. We're coordinating the installation of these improvements with our other projects that we have, our resurfacing projects or any other projects that might impact these improvements. So that's why some of these schedules are extended out. But you'll see that we have 2 that we're working on currently. One would be, I think it's item, I didn't highlight it, item 4, the intersection of Chester Road and Peacehaven Road near Sherwood Forest Elementary School. That project, we've got some resurfacing scheduled along Peacehaven Road, so we're trying to get that work done so that we don't negatively impact the resurfacing that we'll do. And the other is at the intersection of Watown Street and Peachtree Street near Forest Park Elementary School. Again, we're coordinating that with our resurfacing projects. We've had some, we're scheduling meetings with the community to talk about these projects to make sure they're supportive of it. But that just goes through just one level of aspect that we work on to help with children traveling safely to school. In addition to that, we received $500,000 of Safe Route to School bond funds from the state. With those funds, we identified 6 projects that we will actually be extending sidewalk on, and those projects are listed on the second sheet. Those projects are scheduled to be completed by the end of 2016. Other projects that we've worked on, sidewalk projects, we've got $10 million of bond funds which were approved for sidewalk improvements. The sidewalk improvements are scheduled, there's 68 locations. 70% of them are scheduled to be completed within the next 2 years. What you will find attached, which is labeled as Attachment A, is the list of approved bond projects and the schedules. On that schedule, there are 3 different categories. There's either a completion date, saying that which year they will be completed in. There are also projects that are shown requiring federal funding. And we show the schedule for when those projects actually will be, when we will request federal funding. I said 3 categories. I think there's only 2. Oh, yes. So to be completed by 2015 or 2016. And then, there are 3 categories. The category of federal funding, we've got some priority projects that are scheduled for us to request federal funding in 2016, and then there are other projects that will be that we will request federal funding in later years as funding become available. The other thing I wanted to share with you was our sidewalk selection process. One thing that we have available for the community who may want sidewalk in their area, they can actually call and request those sidewalks through CityLink. We also have a link on our website that we're actually updating, but we will have that available soon also. But we ask that requests are reviewed by our staff, and we review them on a point system. The maximum points would be 100, and those point factors would be things such as the street type. So if it's a major thoroughfare, the points would be higher than if it's a local street. Schools located within a mile of a school, whether it's an elementary, middle, or high school. Proximity to transit. So if they're within a mile of transit, then there are higher points that would be awarded for that. Proximity to other transit, it says transit generators, but other transportation generators. Those would be things like if it's in a neighborhood, if it's near a library, if it's near a shopping center, or places that people typically would travel to. Posted speed limit. The higher the speed limit, the more points are awarded for that. Connectivity to existing sidewalk network. If the sidewalk requested location is connecting to existing sidewalk areas, then higher points are awarded for those things. Other factors such as bike lanes or the existing of curb and gutter. One of the reasons for the curb and gutter particularly is that those sidewalk improvements are a lot easier for us to install, and the cost is much less. And then community support. That's a new item that council has asked us to consider, or this committee actually did. And so the higher the number of the number of community residents who are interested in the project, then the higher points that you receive for those. So I've also attached for you projects that are currently on the list waiting for available funding. If neighbors or residents call in and they request sidewalks, like I said, we do this evaluation, we assign points to those sidewalk requests, and we add it to the list, and as funding becomes available, then those sidewalk ratings are used for us to determine the locations that we go to. And that's all that I have. If you all have any questions for me.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Mr. Clark?
How are you going to handle the no curb and gutter? Are you going to put a curb and gutter in, or are you just going to work with the terrain that's there?
All the projects that are on the current bond list we determined would require curb and gutter. So we will be installing curb and gutter on those.
That must be significantly more expensive than if it's already there.
It is. It is. And most of our curb and gutter, most of the locations that require curb and gutter are projects that we usually seek out other funding, like federal funding for, just because of the cost.
Do you have any idea, and I know it varies a lot, running foot cost on a regular sidewalk that's already got curb and gutter versus if we had it put it in?
I think we estimate $50 per linear foot if there's existing curb and gutter, and about $250 per linear foot for just one side.
Yeah, 5
without
times more
curb and gutter.
expensive.
Yes, sir.
Now, can you put curb and gutter just on one side?
Yes.
Okay.
Dan? Is there, I know we're talking about bond money here on most of these projects, but is there an annual funding in the budget to do additional sidewalk? What do we allocate, or what do we have?
I don't remember the exact figure. We'll get it to you, but there is money that we have set aside in the operating budget. And then we use resurfacing money every other year for, that comes from the 2/3 bonds, but I don't think we allocate any of that for sidewalks. We do take the motor vehicle privilege tax money, 1/3 of which is set aside for non-motorized vehicular traffic, and we use some of that for sidewalks.
And is that applied to this list?
No.
Or
No, that's separate.
Okay.
How do the Powell funds enter into this?
We don't use Powell funds for sidewalk work. Most of the Powell funds that we use are used for resurfacing and other improvements, but not for any sidewalks.
Okay.
Eligible, we just don't have the capacity to use them because of other demands.
Okay. I'm interested, we have gone over a couple of times since I've been on the council and updated each time the sidewalk selection criteria and ranking process. And most recently, just I believe late last year, we completed that process. Do we have a similar process for consideration of street crossing improvements, other pedestrian safety matters?
No, sir, we don't have a rating structure as we do for the sidewalks.
How do we consider those needs?
Those needs are primarily identified through our, like the Safe Routes to School program. So we've got a bicycle and pedestrian specialist who works in our office closely with the consultant that we've hired. They visit the schools. They work with the school system, identifying where the children are, who the children are, and where they're traveling. And as they work with them to help identify safe measures for traveling to and from school, then those items are then added to a list. And as funding becomes available, whether they're grants from other areas or like in the bonds, then those projects are then identified and worked.
Okay. So we don't have any systematic method for considering crossing improvements outside the Safe Routes to School program?
No, sir.
I'd like to suggest that we look into implementing that, because I know that often the most dangerous situations for pedestrians are when they're crossing. One of the projects that we're working on currently, the Siles Creek Parkway sidewalk from Bolton to Lachlan, that ranked very high on the state's list of needed projects. Actually was the only bike pedestrian project in our district that made it onto the proposed funded list that that's now in the process of being considered and finalized by the State Board of Transportation was that project. And I know that at my request, transportation staff have done an evaluation of recent pedestrian vehicle accidents along that stretch, and either on that stretch or nearby over the past 10 years have been 10 vehicle pedestrian collisions. I think we can safely assume that they've all been injury involved. At least one of those was a fatality. And I know from having been contacted by one of the survivors of a serious accident in that area, who had to have surgery. She tells me that actually they lost her on the table, had to resuscitate her at one point. She was hit while she was trying to cross in an area that had no designated pedestrian crossing. So in that case, and I think in a number of other similar cases, what we need in addition to sidewalk is a pedestrian crossing, marked, signalized, so that what is actually in that area, a lot of it's people who are either going to or from the main campus of Forsyth Tech. A number of the other pedestrian traffic there are from small apartment areas that are along South Creek Parkway. People, in the case of this lady, who were walking to work, or who are walking to a store, or any one of a number of other small service retail businesses along there, need a way to get there safely. And they are in fact crossing the street. So that one of the complications that we've long faced in that particular location, I know, has been that that's a state designated route. So anything that we do for pedestrian crossing has to be approved by the state DOT. And ironically, within the past 10 years, when we suggested that we needed a crossing at, say, the Miller Siles Creek intersection, the response was, you can't safely get across there because it's too far. Well, okay, that's fair, but we have a lot of people crossing, in fact, every day. So how do we make it less dangerous? And do we need to extend a median structure there so that there is a midway point, or do we need to change the timing on that light so that part of the cycle is on call for pedestrian crossing? There are options, and that is clearly a case where there is a demonstrated public accident history that we need to address. And I know, anecdotally, I know that there are others around the city that we need to have an evaluation program for. Yes, Mr. Montgomery.
That likewise is common in reference to incidents that have occurred on Martin Luther King through Winston-Salem State University's campus. I know we have done and taken steps to attempt to make it easier for students and pedestrians crossing the street there. So much so, if I'm not mistaken, we've taken over control over the portion that actually runs through the campus. That was part of the mandate when we put that fence. State DOT said we'd have to take it over in order to put the fence there, correct? But I know that there's still some additional concerns and pieces, and even since that's been there, there's still been additional individuals who've been struck by cars, even when they properly cross the street in the area there. And from my understanding, I know there were some students from Winston-Salem State who did a report, who worked within transportation last year, and I had requested to see kind of update of implementation of some of the findings that were within that report that was done that kind of showed some additional things of need, and that's something I'd like to see from that report that was done, just to kind of see what have we implemented, or is there a dollar amount associated with some of the things that were found to help assist with that pedestrian issues that we're seeing in that.
Yes, Mr. McIntyre.
I think that a systematic yearly look at our crosswalks and pedestrian zones is vitally important. I think as a society, we're reversing the trend of the car culture. I know it's never going to go away, but I think the pedestrian and bike mobility is an increasingly important thing to many people for when they're choosing where to move their businesses and their homes. So I think it's important that we stay on top of that and be as bicycle and pedestrian friendly as possible.
Yeah. And just for folks that are not familiar with the history of development, a century ago, when you had new neighborhoods, it was routine to put in sidewalks, particularly urban neighborhoods. Then 50, 60 years ago, it was routine to ignore pedestrians when you put in a new subdivision. Now we have requirements that new subdivisions now have to have sidewalks and accommodations for pedestrians. But we're dealing with a gap of several decades of development in and around the city, and that came in during various annexations of legacy fail on the pedestrian safety front that we're trying to retrofit as much as possible, particularly key pedestrian crossings and walking routes, and it's taken a while. It's not cheap, but it's just as important, I think, for public safety as intersection improvements and extra lanes for vehicles. So, I appreciate y'all preparing the background information for the discussion, and hope that this is another step on our continuing improvement in the area. If there's nothing else, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your indulgence this afternoon, and we stand adjourned.
Greg, did you put on your list, I got an email from some gentleman about the underpass under Silas Creek getting under your Silas